The government says it's the biggest reform of the way our railways operate in 2.5 decades. Privatisation is not reversed, but this government is long-fingering the way it was done.
You've got all these different operators and organisations, 100 of them or something involved, and no one really could see what the other person was doing, and there was no, if you like, sort of joined up, or not enough joined up thinking.
To help join things up, the government's creating an arm's-length public sector body, Great British Railways, which will rein in some of the freedoms the privatised train operators had. It'll prescribe more strictly what levels of service should be provided. It was the last of the great privatisations, and it only happened after Margaret Thatcher left office. She wasn't convinced rail privatisation would work. And now, years later, another Tory government is rewriting the whole thing and deploying many of the arguments that were used all those years ago against rail privatisation.
It's pretty complicated. You turn up at a station, there are 3 different machines that you can use to purchase your ticket. It's just too complex.
George Young was Transport Secretary, overseeing the last stage of rail privatisation in the 90s. Grant Shapps' proposals say it was riddled with obvious failings.
This Conservative government document talks about it didn't bring the greater efficiency and innovation. Little of this has happened. Confusing fragmentation. Many costs have consistently risen. Subsidies have doubled.
Yeah. Well, if you read the report, actually, they concede that it did bring efficiencies. It did bring great investment in the rolling stock.
He's not selling it like that. He's selling it as a massive rethink.
I don't think it is a massive rethink. I think it is keeping the core benefits of privatisation, but recognising that not everything was perfect.
And that's brilliant. It's LNER.
Yeah. The current Transport Secretary said the aim was to be customer-focused, but he couldn't be sure fares wouldn't rise above inflation. Some of his fellow Tories worry he's turned his back too much on the private sector.
Now it seems to have a smaller role. It would just be paid to run a service. So it seems as if the private sector is shrinking in this new model and the public sector will grow. And arguably, we'll have to see whether that causes a deficiency in the passenger experience.
During COVID, the government pumped nearly £1 billion a month into rail services to keep them running. Now, the government says there'll be more flexible season tickets to lure workers who've been staying at home back to the office. There was speculation that the new authority, Great British Railways, was a propaganda weapon to help to save the union. Some suggest the government would love to see unified branding on trains to press home its message around the UK.
I think there is a reason why it's called Great British Railways, which is to do with the union agenda, and I'm not against that. I think it's very important people understand that infrastructure is important across the United Kingdom.
But it's not the way to run a railroad.
But you absolutely didn't need these reforms in order to make a unionist point.
The Flying Scotsman made an appearance today. The Scottish and Welsh governments called for more devolution of powers on rail to their administrations. The government says some of its new ticketing changes could begin within weeks. The full reforms are not expected to be in place until 2023.